On to this webinar from the Open Group. It's so great to see so many people from so many countries attending today's event. Today's webinar is being brought to us by BizDesign, which is an extremely active member of the Open Group, and our speaker today, Asvan Gills of BizDesign. Before I hand over to Baz, let me go over a few housekeeping issues just to keep the event moving forward smoothly. Firstly, we would encourage you to ask questions during today's event. Probably the best way to submit a question to today's speaker is via the text Q facility. Do write a question in the text QA facility. Can I ask you to address it to all participants, the way everyone gets a visibility of the questions that are being submitted. We'll endeavour to answer as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the presentation. Alternatively, if you'd like to just make a comment or you'd like to share a view with a fellow attendee, then probably the text chat facility is the best mechanism for doing that. So once again, if you'd like a question to be asked, then please do use the text QA facility. This event is also being fully recorded, so if for any reason you have to leave early, or if you experience any local technical difficulties, I know unfortunately some people do occasionally experience some audio problems, then the full recording of this event will be available from tomorrow, and everyone that's registered for the event will get an email with the appropriate link where they can access that recording. If you're ready, can I ask you to start your presentation?
Well, thank you, Simon. On my behalf, also welcome everybody to this webinar on the practice of enterprise architecture. And see on this first slide, this is also the title of a book that I wrote with my colleague Sven van Dijk, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It started with an agenda. In a minute, I'll introduce myself just so you know who your host is a little bit better. I'll take 2 minutes to quickly introduce BizDesign, and very briefly I'll dive in the question: write another book on architecture, especially with such heavy focus on TOGAF and Archimate. So I'll spend a few minutes on that. Then we'll dive in the actual content of today's presentation in 3 blocks. First, very briefly, what is EA? A bit of theory. This is the first part of our book. We'll look at a little bit more on what does it take to build an EA practice and how do you approach that. This is the second part of our book. And last but not least, I'll take some highlights from the best practices section, the third part of the book. We'll have some conclusions, and there should be plenty of time for questions and answers. Okay. So my name is Bas van Gils. I'm a consultant trainer and researcher for BizDesign. I've been doing this for BizDesign for about 5 years now, and I have a lot of experience. I've done strategy work, I've done IT work on all levels of the organization. At one point, I got my PhD from the informatics department, computer science, or some economics background. I take all that experience when we do our assignments. These days, also when we do architecture work, this mixed background comes in really handy. And that is also reflected in, for example, the blog posts that we publish frequently, or the in discussions that we all participate in. So, if you have any, if you would like to know more, those are very good points to get started. And there's also some contact details here if you have any follow-up questions or suggestions or things you want to discuss. By all means, do get in touch. Very briefly, who is BizDesign? BizDesign is originally a Dutch offering, Dutch organization. We started with a business process management service line about 15 years ago. At the time, we developed consulting services, tooling, training, and best practices for BPM. But over the last 10-15 years, we've also expanded into other areas of strong organizations as well, such as enterprise architecture management, which is what we'll be talking about today. Business modeling, which brings us close to the field of strategy and strategic management, also business requirements management. We're slowly expanding this, For those of you who follow us regularly, you notice that we also have an offering in rule management, and more is happening in the data domain as well. So if data is your thing, then definitely get in touch with me, because I'm working hard on operating in that space. As mentioned, we started in the Netherlands 15 years ago, and in our quest for global domination, we've expanded across the world. A lot of offices in Europe, of course, Netherlands, Belgium, France. We'll see the list over here. But we also have offices in North America, in Toronto and Boston. And we have some partnerships in South America and Australia. So it's not really global presence just yet, but we're getting there one step at a time. Vin, I think that's enough for the introductions. Write a new book on enterprise architecture, especially in a time and age where a lot of books about this exciting subject have been published. Trying to keep up with everything that's published in the field of EA seems to be nearly impossible. Years ago, I thought I'd read pretty much everything that ever been written, but in 2012-13, so much has been released that it seems to be nearly impossible to read it all. So what do we think we have to bring to the table? First of all, we believe in an approach that combines academic rigor with practical relevance. So I try to mix theory, with such as TOGAF and Archimate, to which a lot of organizations and professionals have contributed, with practical experience. So colleagues recently said, we don't need another theory book, we need more practical examples and real-life stories. And that's what we tried to do. So we briefly give our view on what theory should look like, and we immediately dive into real-world experience, projects we've done, things that worked or didn't work so well. We've combined all our experience over engagement over the last 5 years in one not too thick book. It's 150 pages, and the idea is that after skimming through the theory part, you quickly get to stuff you can use in practice. That's the point of this book. So learning, sharing our experience, that was a key driver for writing this book. So when you find in it, first of all, the introduction section, briefly, what EA, how does it position with respect to other management disciplines? Very high level overview of TOGAF and Archimate. Since in part 2 and 3 we talk a lot about these standards, it makes sense to add a little summary of what we feel that's most important about these two. Also, I think TOGAF and Archimate are quite popular worldwide, but there are many professionals who haven't heard about it. And we want to give them the opportunity to learn as much as possible from the standard as well. So as a prelude to parts 2 and 3, get a quick overview of what you can find in TOGAF and Archimate. In let's see, part 2, focus on building the EA capability. This is mostly intended for organizations that are starting up or taking the next step, for an EA capability. So what do you do to get your organization committed and involved in taking this next step? What to get the architecture capability right? And how do you actually implement it and make sure it delivers the value that we hope it would deliver? Structure for the second part. I'll give some quick highlights of this part in a minute. But not least, in the third part, best practices, we take some topics. We had to restore ourselves to 5. Capability-based planning, basing ourselves on TOGAF. Some practices on how to go from strategy to execution, from architecture to design, and so forth, and so on. We'll really look at some of these best practices as well. So today's webinar basically reflects the structure that we all did for our book. Now we saw that there are many people registered for today. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with architecture in general, TOGAF and Archimate in specific. Included a highlight from the theory section. that we will look at briefly. So it's not as bad as it used to be, but still, in many organizations, when we first come in, we hear the question, what is enterprise architecture? Right? There are many definitions. People have different opinions, what it is, what it should be, do it, and so forth, and so on. A debate between architecture as a product, that we see on walls, or architecture as a process, the thing we do to make sure we add value to the business. Debate sort of seems to be over. Well, it's good to look at definitions for a minute. Here you see a definition from BizDesign's Handbook on Enterprise Architecture, which was published in 2012, also covering TOGAF and Archimate in more depth. This definition says that EA is a conceptual tool that helps organizations to get from where they are to where they want to be. And it's sort of a route planner. And to me, it really captures the essence of EA. To go from where you are to where you want to be, and focus on high level, on the essential properties of where you want to go, and helps you to actually get there. So to me, this definition appeals to architecture as a product, those that we make, architecture as a process, the things that we do, and relation between these two. So if you like this definition, feel free to use it. Of course, a more formal definition taken from TOGAF and Archimate will guide us further. But I take the example of one of my favorite cities in the world, Toronto, which you see depicted here in a schematic form. And so IAC definition for our architecture. So this definition says that the architecture of a system is about two things. First, to answer the question, what fundamental organization of that system, so how it's organized and what is fundamental about it. We look at the question, why is this organized in that way? What are the principles guiding design evolution? If you look at the image in the background, let me go back for a second, where the typical layout of a North American city, we said the fundamental organization of this city is a grid. It's a like structure, a matrix, so to speak. In fact, that some roads are curved, like one here in front, the Gardner Expressway, that them are diagonal or even circular, that change the fact that the fundamental organizing logic is to follow a grid-like structure. There are, of course, reasons why this is the case. Right? I read in a history book that it's easier to compute these a rectangular piece of land, so that makes it easier to sell. Also, I found that it's easier to navigate in such a grid-like structure. Basically, my Canadian colleague could point me, go 5 blocks north and 3 blocks east, and then at least I would have an idea of where to go. Different principles lead to different structures. And this quickly becomes apparent if you ever visit a city like Amsterdam. Well, we argue whether it's a big city or a small village. The fact of the matter is that Amsterdam, as our European cities, have a completely different fundamental organization. We built our city about churches, around fence works, around waterways. So we had different principles, different organizing logic, and we end up with different structures. Of course, also applies to the organizations that we all work in. Right? Different organizational principles or enterprise principles lead to different types of enterprises. So to abbreviate this, architecture is all about structure with a vision. What do we need to do EA in practice? Well, you need two things. First of all, you need process, architecture as a process. And this is where we advocate TOGAF. More on that in a minute. We need a language in which we can express our architectures. And we use Archimate. Those standards are maintained by the Open Group. They integrate nicely. They map one-on-one. So this is a really good starting point for doing EA. So let's very briefly look at both these standards. The 6 main components of TOGAF are visualized here. The architecture development method, which is the process for doing EA. For those of you who haven't seen it before, I'll give you a quick rundown in a minute. In architecture development method, which is a phased approach, you make all sorts of architecture content which you want to structure in a formalized language. This is what the architecture content framework is all about. ACF in the top row in the middle align one-on-one with Archimate. Since the ADM is generic and applicable in many different organizations, you should also tune it for the specific circumstances of your own organization. That's what the architecture development guidelines and techniques section is about. Also, the continuum reference models and the architecture capability framework, which for the sake of time I will skip for now, but they align to the ADM as well. So what's the ADM about? Simply put, it's all about preparing the organization for doing architecture work, the preliminary phase. Dive in with developing an architecture vision, phase A. Finding out where we are and where we need to go with respect to that vision, phases B, C, and D. Come up with an architecture roadmap and align that with project management in phases E and F. And when implementation starts, will govern this phase G. Last but not least, once systems have been developed and implemented, realized in your organization, phase H about architect change management, make sure that they continue to add value and we plan them to be. Brief, but that sort of captures the essence of what EM is about. So what Archimate then? Quite extensive. We have an Archimate core, which you see a high-level meta model here. We have 2 extensions, a motivating extension about stakeholders, goals, and requirements. Implementation and migration extension, which appeals to realizing your architecture through project management and project governance and that sort of stuff. So what's Archimate all about? Well, you can imagine in our book, we spend a bit more time on that. But for now, let's suffice it to say that we a general framework, which you see here, 3 domains, the application and technology, and the aspects, active structure, behavior, and passive structure. I won't explain all the concepts here in detail. There are some things that I would like to point out that you can also find in our book, which are a bonus with respect to the specification of Archimate, which you can find online. But in this case, we've added some best practices from teaching Archimate for 10 years, I suppose. We point out the symmetries between all the layers and columns. Right, I'll give a couple of examples. Between active structure elements and behavior elements, as we see here, there's always the same relation. It's an assignment relation that says one active structure element is involved in the execution of one of the behavioral elements. Another bit of symmetry we can see in the behavioral column, where we have business services realized by something. At the top of it's a process, which use application services which are realized by a function, which infrastructure services which are realized by another function. So service function, service function, service function. A lot of symmetry in there as well. By bringing those aspects into the text, we that it's easier to learn the sense of how to do Archimate modeling. Still, if you read it and you have more questions or suggestions, by all means do get in touch. But of course, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and in applying Archimate in the context of TOGAF. And the visual tries to capture how that works. On the left. The first thing you do, of the things that you do, is to develop a baseline model of your architecture using Archimate's core that we just saw. Where it says baseline, you use these concepts to develop a model of the essence of the organization as it is now. Then, based on the goals of our stakeholders, translated more into requirements, list at the top, Archimate motivation extension, you develop a target architecture. So target architecture, again, expressed in Archimate's core, language the essence of the enterprise as we want it to be. Actually, there's a gap between baseline and target. Having a nice overview of baseline and target is cool, but of course, it's better actually implemented. So is the implementation a migration extension with plateaus, work packages, and deliverables to go from A to B. So how that works. Let's dive in a bit more. Let's look at some examples from the section Building the EA Capability. So here the challenge is how to get started with enterprise architecture. Right, part of the book, we talk about building the capability in 3 phases. Right, the 6, 7, and 8. This is taken literally from the book. Chapter 6 is all about getting the organization committed and involved, with attention for several sub elements. Chapter 7 is about getting the architecture capability right. This is one of the points in the book. We'll talk about tooling, for example, current big topic for many organizations. And last but not least, making the architecture capability work. This we talk about training, about doing a pilot project, and for example, how to do agile architecture. Get some of these in more detail. When you get started with your EA capability, it means to look at what you already have. Many organizations already do some EA work, maybe explicitly, maybe on a per project basis, maybe only in one domain or in one line of business. And an architecture scan or assessment can give you an insight where you are and in which area you want to improve. Do several different assessments actually. We have an architecture capability quick scan, which gives a high level overview, but we also have an architecture value assessment, which is about look at the actual results and deliverables and added value by EA. And how do we add to the overall bottom line of the organization? Or an enterprise architecture realization assessment. Something about how does it align with all the frameworks that we already have in the enterprise. How well is our EA capability aligned? One of my colleagues will soon do another webinar on architecture assessment. So if you'd like to know more about dates and when it will happen, do send me a note. From one assessment that we did, I've taken 2 quick screenshots, example outcomes. The diagram on the left should spend attention to IT governance, which is not underdeveloped if you compare it to the other disciplines. Spider web on the right, we have to spend some attention to goal setting and measurement. These are outcomes that you get out of such assessment, and it helps in figuring out where to invest, taking our EA capability to the next level. This tends to work really well, and we have some more assessment visualizations in a minute. So one of the key decisions that we have to make is look at, are we going to start with a top-down EA approach, or going to implement EA in a more bottom-up fashion? In my experience, organizations tend to approach this as an either-or decision. Right? Either we go top-down, where we start with the enterprise goals, the enterprise strategy, principles, all that sort of stuff, roadmaps, gun structures, all stuff that you need for the long haul. Or we see EAs chasing operational issues, hope in the light of a long-term vision, but they do work with standardization, and hope slowly work your way up to the overall long-term vision for the enterprise. So, why do I have a bottom-up or down? Why is if you can sort of figure out where the golden opportunities? And we think that an EA maturity scan, especially when you consider EA value add, will give you a lot of insight in what are golden opportunities for EA, saying top-down and a bottom-up approach. So it could give you a lot of insight on where to start and taking your EA practice and value to the next level. So what then about implementation. Right? It's great if we have a vision or an idea on where we want to go with our architecture capability. How do we implement it in a step-by-step manner? One that I really like is that it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. People have been credited by saying this for the first time, one of which was Niels Bohr. But I chased it down to Robert Storm Peterson, so I'll add it to him. If you look at organizations, then one of the things that we know is that the enterprise and priorities change continuously. Stuff happens in our environment, people are leaving and joining, priority change, legislation changes all the time, and so forth and so on. So even though it would be nice to reduce uncertainty with respect to the product that we're delivering, what is exactly that you get when you implement EA? Reduce uncertainty with respect to how do we actually build that then? Still, in practice, we see that a pure waterfall approach with vision, a plan, implementing and testing whether we've done what we're supposed to be doing doesn't work. The world changes too fast. How a completely emergent approach where things happen without a reason, so completely emergent doesn't work either. So it's best to sit somewhere in the middle and look for an iterative and incremental approach. Basically figuring out how do we add value as soon as possible and keep going. Trying to come up with an agile development cycle of the EA capability, where hopefully we have an insight in goals for the enterprise and EA team. The solar arrows indicate that this changes every now and then. That's basically the input for figuring out where are we, what's the capability assessment currently, plan an iteration, which is something we can deliver in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks maybe. You then take the next step, the actual execution, and learn from what you've done and go back to capability assessment. The goals of the enterprise might have changed, but at least you caught it early. So that how that sort of works. What to make it happen? Well, first of all, KPIs and dashboards. Right? I want to know for my architecture teams, what are the KPIs? So when are they successful? How well are we doing? So dashboarding is a good thing. So I want to keep track of issues going on in the world around us. Which the issues are we addressing? How, when, and so forth and so on. Of course, also to keep track of lessons learned. What did we do well? What can we do better next time? To make that all work, the aspect, of course, is continuous management and sponsorship. If you don't have sponsorship to doing EA in practice, and you EA as a strategic instrument in your organization, then you get into trouble after a few steps. But if that happens, at least the steps that you have taken will align with overall goals for the enterprise, because those were the inputs for your capability assessment, iteration, planning, execution anyway. Right? So ensuring that you add value every time you go through this cycle, you also make sure that you continually have support and sponsorship from your management team. Challenges, of course, is to come up with a set of KPIs and then subsequently build a dashboard to monitor them. But hey, something each and every organization has to look at on their own, because every organization has different goals. Let's take one of the other topics from the book. Why so much emphasis on models and tools and standardized languages and so forth? I recently did a survey online. I spent a few days searching the web and doing some sort of graph, and it seems that about 60% of all publications on architecture mention or are fully about architecture modeling. 60%, maybe a little bit more. That's quite a big number. Exact numbers, but because it also changes a lot, we write a lot about EA. But for a ballpark figure, that's not so bad. So important. Well, first of all, if you work in a team, well, that's assumption. We're more in teams. Modeling, in my opinion, is a team sport as well as a contact sport. We have to work with the people around us. But in a model in a team, you get shared understanding of what enterprise looks like. Depending on different stakeholders, you generate different views, different visualizations based on your shared model, right? There are specific rules for developing a financial view, such as a balance sheet or account, an overview of accounts. There are rules on how to develop an organizational view, how to develop a process view, an application view, a leadership view, whatsoever. Right? Different stakeholders require different insights, therefore they require different visualizations. And if you have a shared model with good tools support, then you can generate those views. Right, of course, is the language of choice, and there are many tools available for this, including BizDesign Architect. Best practice is to capture as much as possible about the architecture in a single model, even data financial aspects, and generate different views for the stakeholders whenever we can. Oops. I think enough for now about building the EA capability section. I would also like to take some time, about 20 minutes, to look at some examples from the best practice section and move on to some questions and answers. What can you find in the best practice section? There are many, of course, but we chose 5 topics. First of all, capability-based planning. This seems to be the hottest topic in EA at the moment. I've recently attended several seminars, webinars, conferences, even many client engagements. This is what people are talking about. How can you do capability mapping? How can capability-based planning? How does Archimate support capability-based planning? How does that relate to TOGAF? This is a big discussion. I know there have been some proposals on integrating capability-based planning in the Archimate standard. I think more are coming. The debate is there. I encourage you all to join the Open Group in the Open Group conferences. I think Amsterdam is coming up really soon, and hope we can see you there and talk about this exciting subject. And how to use capability-based planning to data management capability, an example. Another topic that we speak about extensively is how to go from strategy to execution. Claim that architecture is a strategic discipline, which is true. Strategists sometimes have a different opinion. They talk about strategy and strategic management in their realm. So do these two relate? How to go from strategy to architecture, and the next section, how to go from architecture to design and actually implement it. Going all the way up from strategy via architecture to design to implementation is covered there. Now, I've spoken quite a bit today about models and why models are important. Another thing that we see a lot in EA is the use of standards and governance. I had the pleasure of doing a lot of interesting engagements in the area of standards and governance, and some of those best practices have made it into the book. It's a framework for how to keep your standards base. We have tips on that extend the TOGAF framework on how to do governance. You'll find some practical tips there. Last but not least, and maybe you expected this from us since we're from BizDesign, we have architecture modeling tips with Archimate, solving some common Archimate modeling problems with Archimate. So, for example, how do you model an enterprise service bus? How do you deal with reference models? How do you deal with conceptual logical physical models, and so forth and so on. Let's look at capability-based planning. The ADM, or the entire TOGAF specification, in fact, talks about capability-based planning. There are definitions, there are examples on how to do capability-based planning, and it really is an essential ingredient in going via ADM. In this diagram here, I've tried to capture how that actually works. How do you use capability-based planning? In the first 2 phases, especially in the architecture vision base, this is where we develop goals and a high-level aspirational view of capabilities that we would like to develop in order to from A to B. Developing your capability maps and assessing where are we now, what is our current level of capability, what is our desired level of capability along different dimensions, that you do in the architecture vision phase. Now, selling this is really great if you make the spidery web diagrams. I have some examples in a minute. I find capability diagrams communicate really well with management. I've done it in several organizations. I use it to talk to line management, top management, architects, people from the workflow floor, and people get it. So that's very useful, especially in that phase. Then the next three phases, B, C, and D, you figure out baseline and target architects to bridge the capability gap. Of course, then you develop gap analysis, and in phases E and F, you develop a roadmap and project plan to go from A to B. Make sure you implement it in phase G, and then in phase H again, you continually monitor what implemented capabilities have business value that we planned, and basically closes the loop. Because if that's not the case, then we push an ADM cycle. So see that the concept of capability is really key in going around the ADM. Let's look at that in a little bit more detail. Imagine that we are a big organization, for example, a Dutch governmental organizations where I recently did an assignment. Let's say you want to build a data management capability with EA methods. Thus, you can use TOGAF, especially the ADM, as a structured method for developing a vision, coming up with an implementation plan, and going from A to B. This is known. We've spoken about this before. The capability-based planning, for example, in alignment with the management body of knowledge, the DM book, to find out where are we, where do we want to go. So what's our current level of capability, what the desired level of capability. I have a visual of a capability assessment with me in the next slide. Provides a basis for road mapping. What do we do first? What do we do next? And we use Archimedes models, of course, to figure out where are we now, where do we want to go, and so forth and so on. I'm going to show you next, in the next 5-10 minutes or so, is how it works. Right? So the things that we've developed is a data management maturity scan. You see the results of a scan here. On the vertical axis at the top, you see sub-disciplines or sub-capabilities that we know in the realm of data management. So capabilities would be data governance, data architecture management, data development, and what we have, metadata management, and so forth and so on. Right? That's the list on the left. The horizontal axis, we have 7 aspects. So we look at each of those capabilities from angles, from different perspectives, from different dimensions. I think TOGAF calls them dimensions. Dimensions are goals and principles, activities, technology, practice and techniques, and so forth and so on. You ask yourself the question, let's take the tone, with respect to governance. Well, are our goals and principles? Do we have them? Are they in place? Are they known throughout the enterprise? In this case, we scored it a 5. Use point scale that sort of aligns with CMM maturity levels. And you take the next question for data governance: how well are our activities, how well are our deliverables, and so forth and so on. So it's table at the top, and if you just look at it visually, then already you can see some things. For example, in the rightmost column, we list that for organization and culture, we have a lot of low scores, a lot of red cells. So apparently we don't really have a data culture. To the left, we have the technology column, which has a lot of green cells. So this is an organization where we like to buy really cool tools. We don't really have the organizational culture to use them properly to develop our data in a proper way. Analysis along the rows, for example, data quality management is really, really poor. But if you look up a few rows, you'll notice that data security management is not so bad. So our data is very secure, but it's of low quality. That's what you can immediately see from that table. Of course, visualize it differently also. I've included two spider web diagrams here at the bottom to get insight in what areas do we want to invest in. You can do further analysis, for example, compare such analysis from the architecture group to a similar analysis from the management team to see if there are any differences in perspective, and so forth and so on. Going into organization and filling out these assessments, you get a really good sense of where are we, and what is the area that we should invest in most. So in this organization, I wouldn't start buying more tools. I would figure out whether I can improve the corporate culture and see if I can use that to also improve data quality management, and if we can go from there. Right? Something simple that will help you. Once you've done that, right, we have our capability increment defined, we have goals defined, the steps that we want to take, then start defining a target architecture, right? Or let's start baseline and then do the target architecture for what our data management capability would look like. Put this diagram here, which sort of gives you an overview. Everything at the top left corner here. You might say it, by the way, but underwater, this is just Archimate. All I've done is change the visualization a little bit to make it more graphically appealing. I've found that this works well. This is also supported by our tool, by Architect, so you can change the visualization if you want. At the top left corner, we have governance teams defined in the data council. In the data council, we have several stewards defined, and each of those stewards is responsible for information area. So for Archimate Group among us, the information areas are modeled as business objects. Data council is business collaboration, and the stewards are roles. One of the information areas called customer is decomposed in information area in entities. Right? So customer, we see that we have parties, specialized into persons and organizations, and so on. Drilling down further, we can see that these entities, business objects, are realized in various information systems. They're realized by data objects that are in ISIS and CSIS and in the master data management hub. At the bottom we see MDM hub with a little crown. And the crown is just a visualization that says the system has the golden record for customer. Whether it's a system of record or a system of reference, that remains to be seen. But at least in this high-level overview diagram, you can see that that's where you can find the golden record. And going from left to right, we have a data flow moving into the BI space. Something that's related to BI has a little graph. We have data flowing into the data warehouse and to workspaces, data marts, and so forth, and so on. This could be a high-level visualization of a target architecture, and then, of course, you develop a roadmap to implement that further. For high level, that kind of works. But I think that's not enough to actually run a program on. So from an architecture perspective, you may want to take one level deeper. From my perspectives, one of my frustrations, well, frustrations, that might be strong. One of the things that I notice is that many organizations talk about really cool tools, such as data vault modeling and data virtualization, and so forth and so on, without having a solid grip on the base of, let's say, a logical data flow diagram. Flow diagrams are actually very easy in Archimate. I've realized one here, where on the left we have two systems. We have data flowing from the ERP system in the billing system, from the CRM system into the billing system. Actually made something that looks a little bit like a Jordan style or information engineering style data flow visualization, where we have functions for manipulating data, those are little gears in the top left corner, and functions that have to do with storing information. Those are little, well, in the top left corner, such as customer store here. One more extension that we made to basic Archimate, tip on the flow relation, let's say from CRM to pull customer data, all you can do is type in a label. What we actually did is we made it possible to drop a data object on that relation and to take the name of the data object to visualize what is flowing from the CRM system to the customer data function. Right? So not a lot of magic, but still this way of visualizing I found is very appealing. It's a very good high-level local data flow diagram that you can use, for example, to align with your infrastructure. Right? Take all the stores and then you figure out, how am I going to store all that data? Is it going in rows and columns? Am I going to develop tables? Or am I going to just connect it to a web service? How am I going to do that? Whereas other functions with a little gear are all about data processing, and you want those as well in a different way. This type of visualization, in my opinion, tends to work really well in practice to communicate to various stakeholders. Let's work toward the conclusion. We think that with TOGAF, Archimate, and a lot of best practices that you can find in our new book, very good basis for tool-supported EA practice. And tool support, as I mentioned it, I think brings a lot to the table. It helps you with communication. Architecture, in my opinion, is and will always remain a communications game. Shared understanding of where we are, where we want to go, and how to get there. And those tools really help you to get there. Also, I would like to end with a call to action. I said a few times before, but I really believe that if we want to bring our practice, our field to the next level, then what we need is not more theory. What we need is more practical stories. And if I look right now, I see a lot of people online who are listening. All of you, or some of you, will have really good stories about what you've done with EA, worked, what did not work, and so forth and so on. So if you have good stories to share, by all means, do get in touch with me. I'd like to talk to you about them. Get in touch with the open group and present your stories, because this, I think, is the best way to take our field to the next level and to add more value to our organizations. So to action, and the challenge is there. Do share what you learned. So what can you do? What can you do tomorrow? Tomorrow we should take the next step in building a strong EA capability with TOGAF and Archimate by the following things. First of all, set some goals for your architecture function and ask yourself the question, the KPIs for us. So can we prove that we've been successful? Can we do an architecture value of maturity scan to help you get that insight? If that, do get in touch. Simply, if not been doing this already, get ready for doing some serious modeling with Archimate. Training, there's a lot of training material available. There are webinars, there are white papers. The entirety is available online, or to a facility. Business will happily help you there, but there are many other organizations, universities, high schools, and so forth and so on that will help you with training. I want to do some tool section. There are open source tools such as Archi, or commercial tools such as IBM, Sparks, or BizDesign Architect. That's crucial. Don't check and start doing EA right now. Start with stakeholder analysis, capability analysis, figure out what you can do to make the project a success, and gain the success. If you gain your successes, then you'll make sure you have continued support for keeping the project running, building a strong EA capability. Well, at least some more information. A lot of the topics that I've spoken about today are also available on our blog in a summarized form. Right? We have a series on how to get started with TOGAF. We have a series on how to deal with architecture standards. There are many series and topics available. So on age architecture, on you name it, it's there. You can also look on our website for general information about BizDesign, our training offering, or even the tool. Or download webinars, white papers, the full specification of TOGAF and Archimate from the website of the Open Group. That's it up for now. Back over to you, Simon.
That's great. As usual, many, many thanks for that presentation. We've had some really active debate going on in the text chat facility. Just before we start to work through some of the questions on the QA, two very popular questions. First of all, Baz, can you explain specifically how people can get a copy of your slide deck? And also, can you repeat the name of the book and the author that you referred to through your presentation, please, Baz?
Okay. So, thank you for those questions. So the second question is easiest. The name of the book is the same as the name of today's webinar, right? Practice of Enterprise Architecture. It's by myself and my colleague Sven van Dijk. To know more about this book or the slide deck, I think they will be published on the BizDesign website tomorrow. Or to contact the people in charge of the blog, so there will be an announcement of where to download the material from today's blog, also with a link on where you can purchase the book. Listen, Simon? I think we lost Simon. I do not seem to have. I do have access to the chat facility. So let's see if I can capture some slides, some questions myself. Most questions seem to be about where to obtain a copy of the book. Most all seem to want a copy of the slides. We'll make sure to get them to you. There's a question. Can you explain differences between EA and strategic planning? This is a question by Gutierrez. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Differences between EA and strategic planning. So it depends on how you define strategic planning. So strategists tend to look at different fields. They say strategy or strategic management is about positioning the firm with respect to its environment. So they talk about who are competitors, markets do we want to be active in, what market segment do we want to conquer, and that stuff. To have a solid understanding of that type of questions, we can ask the next question, which is, if I want to position my with respect to its environment, how I add value and so forth and so on, how I get organized. So what is the fundamental organization of my enterprise to make that happen? And actually something that architects tend to worry about. That answers that question.
Right, Baz. I'm back again now. I do apologise. My phone went dead on me there.
No, okay. I answered one of the questions that I found in the chat facility. So back over to see if we have any more questions.
Thank you, Baz. Sorry about that. Okay, well, a question from Lucas. Lucas put the question in very early on in the session. The question is, how do you sell enterprise architecture at a company that has none or very ad hoc activities and doesn't know why it should have enterprise architecture?
This is a very popular question, and it's a great question, actually. So let's assume this organization is running very smoothly. Right? Everything we do is a big success. We have no problems whatsoever. IT is not too complex. Our projects are all a big hit. Then what with the EA? Everyone on the line here will understand that this is never going to happen. There are always challenges to overcome. Right? There are complexities in our IT landscape. We have silos. We have data silos. We have legacy information systems. Our processes may be duplicated. We have regulatory issues. And evolving tend to touch everything in the enterprise. Right? Fixing a data silo is more than upgrading your IT system to, let's say, big ERP package. They touch many organizational processes or functions. What I would do in such a situation is figuring out the top 3 issues in that organization, the high-level capability analysis of what it touches, and then come up with a cost-effective, value-added roadmap to go from A to B and try to get some sponsorship for solving those issues. And those issues will be top of mind for your management anyway, right? Because they're big issues. So some pain points, and then figure out how to add your EA team. But keep small, show value, and then go from there. Build the EA practice based on your successes, however small they may be initially. It's a blanket statement, but I hope that gives you a sense of direction. Simon?
Question here from Gabriel asking, architecture application is a part of TOGAF development. Work with meta models to get automatic code, but what is the difference between automate meta model and meta model for architecture application?
Cool. That's a question that I can interpret in many different ways. So I'm going to choose one. So, modeling language. It's a modeling language. So we have concepts, and we have relations, and we have grammar that specifies which relation you can use between which concepts, what that means, which is semantics, I suppose, and so forth, and so on. It's a formal modeling language. Just like UML, or object role modeling, or OWL, or whatever formal modeling language that you can think of. Architect also focuses on high-level models of the entire enterprise. So you cover business aspects, process, roles, responsibilities, services, and so forth, and so on, as well as IT aspects, such as which systems do we have, what infrastructure do they run on, and so forth, and so on. Since it's so high-level, it's been not very useful to generate code from. What you want to do is take your high-level enterprise models and link them to detailed design models. Let's say a 4+1 architecture document for your software components. And you can drill down all the way from stakeholders, drivers, goals, requirements, logical architecture component in Archimate, and continue drilling down into your detailed UML models and generate your code from there. So eventually you can do that entire trace across all of your models. Now Google support there, of course, is essential. And I hope that answers the question, of course.
A question from Nelson. This is quite a long question, so I'll just read it out slowly. Nelson asks, could you model a new application, feature architecture, design using Archimate, or will you use it more as a catalog, registering your organization's assets in terms of business, application, and infrastructure aspects?
That's also an interesting question, and I would say that really depends on two things. First of all, the goals for enterprise architecture, and secondly, the maturity of your organization. So let's start with the first one. If the goal for EA is to get an overview of your architecture assets or your enterprise assets, just keeping a catalog out there of all your logical and physical components and the links between them is enough. Logical and physical, well, in some cases you may have various physical instances of one logical component, and as part of asset management I would want to know this. In other cases, keeping track of your assets is not going to be enough. You will see your components, either at a logical or physical level, the relations between, data flows between them, and so forth, and so on, in order to do analysis and improve the application landscape, whatever that means. Well, the second aspect then, what about organizational maturity, or perhaps I should say the maturity of your architecture team? It's easier to start with catalogs than it is with full models. You might want to start with catalogs, some traction, do some weight analysis, and once added some value with your EA team, build upon that and do more advanced analysis and to the modeling realm from there. So not a clear statement of direction on do this or that, but a sense of getting for what you want to achieve in your organization and go from there.
That's fantastic. Well, I notice we've now reached the end of our allotted time, so I think this would be a good time to bring today's event to a close. Baz, have you got any final final statements you'd like to make?
Yes, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. It was a pleasure to present it to you. When I went over the chat to hunt down some comments, so that I enjoyed the presentation, so that's good news. Looking forward to some comments from you guys, to hear your stories, your practice, the things that worked and did not work, because I think those will take our profession to the next level. So thanks. Have a wonderful evening if you're in Europe, or afternoon if you're in the US, or I guess early morning over there in Australia. So thanks for attending, and see you next time.
Thank you very much. And for all the people that we haven't got round to their questions, we do store these questions, and they will be shared with Baz and his team. I'm sure that many of those can be answered offline. So thank you, Baz, and thank you, everyone. And speak to you all again soon.